day, good evening, good night, wherever you are watching the video. I appreciate you dialing in for another one of our Sunday School series. This week we're looking at we're looking at session 3. It's called a Deceiver. Interesting title there. And if we look back, of course, we covered last week. We talked about Rebecca being selected or God chosen for Isaac's wife, and the lesson there in regards to the faithful servant. And this week we're moving a little bit forward in the Bible we're looking at a situation probably a good 20 years down the road from that meeting. So we're looking at chapter 25 for the most part. It introduces us to Jacob to all of this, and after taking Rebecca as his wife at the age of 40, Isaac prayed for her because she couldn't just conceive. So Isaac and Rebecca are trying to get things going, and of course the Lord hears the prayer, and Rebecca becomes pregnant with twins. Okay, so now out of those twins we have Esau and Jacob to follow. I won't get into the minutiae of that. That's a separate Bible study altogether. But there in the birth, there's a little bit of meaning behind all that, as Esau's being born and Jacob's holding on to his heel and being born right after him, soon after. So that significant reaction would be a telltale sign of their destiny, of things to come. And so we move on to chapter 26. The focus shifts to Isaac. He's getting a little bit older, and so as his wealth is multiplying as well, so he is getting older. Genesis 27, chapter 27, recounts the story of Jacob stealing the birthright, and that's what we're looking at in regards to how he's done that. So that's what we're looking at when we go through this. So here's a question for you before we started. How should knowing that God is able to accomplish his purpose through flawed people impact us? Wow, that's very interesting. We'll ask that question again at the end of the lesson. So we're going to get started right away in Genesis 27, verse 18 through 20. When he came to his father, he said, "My father," and he answered, "Here am I. Who are you, my son?" This is Jacob, by the way. Jacob replied to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, "How did you ever find it so quickly, my son?" He replied, "Because the Lord your God made it happen for me." Okay, so what's going on here is we have a situation where Jacob's looking to get the blessing from his father. For the most part, as we know, Esau was kind of careless with his birthright and sold it to or gave it to Jacob. When we look at that for some food because he was hungry. So we know that Isaac was wanting to give Esau and bless him, give him the blessing of inheritance. But of course, Rebecca overheard the whole thing, and she said, "Well, I'm going to get Jacob to look like and act like Esau so that he can get the blessing." Now, keep in mind, Isaac is pretty much, for all intents and purposes, he's blind. So he can't see anything. He has to go on other senses. So he really can't see what's going on. Otherwise, this would never work. So she covered Jacob with the animal skins, because Esau was the hunter of the family. Now he's always out hunting. He's always bringing back game and food, and Jacob is pretty much close to home. Okay, so that's the situation between the two men. So why is Jacob doing this? He is seeking the inheritance. He is seeking the blessing at the encouragement of his mother. So that's what's going on here. Now, and so we got a very interesting personality. Jacob's a deceiver. He's got an interesting personality. He deceives others as well, but eventually he reaps from his deception of other people. And eventually, God will use him for his glory. And we'll get into that later on. So now we look at the fathers. What's so important about Isaac's position? Well, yeah, he's the paternal head of the family. But back in this time, the father was the one that specifically handled the authority in regards to the males. He would make sure that they were raised by the laws and what they believed. They acted as the high priest of the family and the household. So the patriarch was pretty much the absolute at the top. And so it was very important that we realize that. Isaac's getting ready to, bestow his blessing upon his eldest son. His eldest son has to go out and get some food and bring back and make him dinner, and he would bestow the blessing. Well, while he's out, Rebecca convinces, Jacob, hey, dress like this, act like this, and this is the food you're going to give him. Of course, now we look at this. What is Isaac saying? How did you ever return so quickly? You just went out hunting. How are you back so soon? And he's like, well, look at his response. Because the Lord your God made it happen for me. So he's kind of pulling at some of those heartstrings because Isaac can't see him right now. He can't really see what's going on. So that's kind of interesting that when we look at all of that going on. So how this is all unplanned is kind of interesting. So question, how do we try to fool others to get a blessing today? How do we try to include God in our schemes? Oh, well, interesting, isn't it? There's a lot of truth to that. So we're just susceptible of scheming. If we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we're very selfish with our prayers. We want the blessings now rather than later. Sometimes we want the blessing more than what God's blessing others. We do that. Whereas we read where Jacob is being very forthright and physical and out in the open, so to speak, in this deception, sometimes we can be just a deception in our prayer life, can't we? So moving on, we look at chapter 27, 21, 27. Then Isaac said to Jacob, please come closer so that I can touch you, my son. Are you really my son Esau or not? So Jacob came closer to his father Isaac. When he touched him, he said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So right now, Isaac's kind of confused, is he not? He's like, that doesn't sound like Esau. Again, he's blind. He really can't see what's going on. He's got to rely on other senses. He can't trust his ears because that sounds like Jacob. But he feels like it. So now so when he touched him, he said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. The fur. And then in verse 23, he did not recognize him because his hands were very hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he blessed him. Again, he asked, are you really my son Esau? And he replied to him, I am. Then he said, bring it closer to me. Let me eat some of my son's game so that I can bless you. Jacob brought it closer to him and he ate. He brought him wine and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, please come closer and kiss me, son. So he came closer and kissed him. When Isaac smelt his clothes, he blessed him and said, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. Okay, so this whole time, Isaac's just trying to figure out, is this really my son? Is this the right one? This is kind of weird. So he wants to touch his arms. Oh, well, it feels like my son, Esau, even though it doesn't sound like him. It smells like him. He's trying to get him, he's asking these questions. He's got some doubt. And he's like, bring me some of your food, because he can taste wild game. He can taste whether or not this is hunting food, so to speak, rather than domesticated food. And any of us who did any hunting, or had wild game, you can tell there's a difference between you eating hamburger meat and deer meat. Is a difference. And I'm sure Isaac could tell the difference between domesticated livestock and the stuff that his son would go out and kill and bring home to fix to eat. So all these things were used. He's trying to, Isaac's trying to figure out what's going on. He can't really trust his eyes. He can't trust his voice or his ears, excuse me, because it sounds like Jacob, yet he feels like Esau. He smells like Esau, and he can cook food like Esau. So this has got to be Esau, doesn't it? So he got closer and he kissed him. The kiss, for the most part, was for Isaac to smell his son. Now, if he got closer and he smelled anything other than Esau, then I think the gig would have been up. He would have said, no, good try, Jacob, but I'll wait for your brother to return. So the smell was very important. So the patriarch's nose informed him that the clothing of the son whom he was blessed carried the odor of the man who hunted in the wild. So we look at the blessing. So he's like, the Lord has blessed. The Old Testament, to bless means endow the power of success, including prosperity and longevity. This verbal abuse is normally futuristic. Additionally, the Old Testament views God as the only source of blessing. In the accounts of the patriarchs, blessing is linked specifically to the reproductive powers. Thus, we see that God alone gives life. The basic understanding of God as a life giver extends through the scriptures to the ultimate expression in John 3:16. So we see that. So question, when is it healthy to remain skeptical about a person's claims? I would say all the time. So I always listen to what people tell me, but at the same time, I want you to prove it. Or if I can prove it on my own, that you're telling the truth. So I'm always skeptical of people. You can show me your worth, you can show me your actions, but I want to see them over time. If you're going to be a prayer warrior, you're going to be consistent in something like that. If you're one of these people that are truly blessed by God and you feel that and you talk about that, show me that when you're in your times of adversity as well, not just at the times when you're on the mountain, those kind of things. So me personally, I'm skeptical of anybody's claims all the time. That's just who I am. Now, we're looking at Holman commentary real quick. I've got some interesting notes here. So, all right. So, why did God not intervene on this deceptive lie? Why did God not trust a greater spiritual responsibility upon the aging man, the joyous son promised Isaac? In short, why does God let people get away with things like this? And this is part of what we're talking about here. So, it was seen that the only way to understanding the situation to conclude that whatever have been wrong in the stratagem and deception of Jacob and Rebekah, the sin of Esau and Isaac was infinitely more grievous. God does not approve of lying, and Jacob and Rebekah as well knew this. They were sensitive to the spiritual people, but they had decided that as bad deception might be in God's sight, it had become necessary in the case in order to prevent a much worse sin. That is blasphemous, presuming to convey the most holy God's promises to a man who neither wanted nor would honor it. And he's talking about Esau there. And to do so directly would face God's greatest commandment against it. So such an eventuality surely would have incurred God's most severe judgment on both Isaac and Esau. And this they felt would prevent at all costs. So maybe so. And we'll look more into that. Did Rebekah and Jacob think that they needed to take these steps? The greater need was in mind. And it's possible. The real scandal is Isaac's. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute because that's in Kidner. Excuse me. Anyway, that's what real quick on the commentary there in regards to the reason for those actions is what we're looking at there. So now moving on to Genesis 27, 28, 30. May God give to you, again, he's continuing his blessing on. That's the thing. Jacob's continuing on he's continuing on his blessing to his father. So that's what we're looking at. His father Isaac is continuing on with the blessing to Jacob, who he thinks is Esau. May God give to you from the dew of the sky and from the riches of the land an abundance of grain and new wine. May people serve you and nations bow down to worship you. Be master over your relatives. May your mother's son bow to worship you. Those who curse you will be cursed, and those who bless you will be blessed. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob left the presence of his father Isaac, his brother Esau arrived from hunting. Okay, so we look at this blessing. It echoes kind of God's covenant to Abraham, does it not? Bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. The abundance of grain and new wine, the blessing of the land, the fruitful and multiply, all this stuff that we're talking about. This idea of prosperity and well-being is what's being conveyed here, is it not? And that's what we're looking at. So he got the blessing from his father. Now, could Isaac turn around and say, wait a minute, that's not for you, that was for Esau, and be done with it? Well, but see, the blessing's already given. When it's spoken, it's done. Back in these times, you just didn't take what you say. You didn't go back on your word. Once it was given, it was done, move on. This would become a problem between Esau and Jacob, to the point that Jacob would have to flee to get away from the wrath of the brother. Now, of course, they would make up in the years to come, but at this point in time, that wasn't the case. He had to run. He had to get away from him. So he left with that blessing in place from his father Isaac. And so that's what we're looking at right there. So now we look at Kittner again. And I was going to mention this earlier. Now we look at Kittner. The real scandal is Isaac's frivolity. His palate had long since governed his heart, okay, and silenced his tongue, for he was powerless to rebuke sin that was Esau's downfall. He now proposed to make it his arbiter between peoples and nations. Unfitness for office shows in every act of his sightless man, rejecting the evidence of his ears for that of his hands, following the promptness of his palate and seeking inspiration through all things, his nose. Yet God put the very factors to work for him. So what Kittner is saying here is, the real problem here is the fact that Isaac, who is faithful just as his father was to God, with his senses failing, his eyes failing, didn't trust his ears. His stomach was more of he was using the stomach more of a sound judge than he was anything else. It was clear that the person that spoke before him didn't sound like Esau, but yet he still said, okay, well, he can cook and the food's good, so this has got to be Esau. On top of that, he did not speak in out of turn, or not out of turn, but he didn't raise up and protest when he found out Esau was trying to get rid of his birthright for a bowl of stew. He didn't say anything about that. He didn't care about that. So you kind of see that Isaac was not being very faithful to trusting what was before him. It was a bit selfish, yeah. It was a bit deceptive by Rebekah and Jacob, yes. But was it necessary? Yes, it was. Because we look at this situation and we ask ourselves, well, why did God let this happen? If Jacob was going to be blessed to begin with, why did he even bother with Esau? Well, the thing that we got to look at, and I think that what Rebecca is looking at and what Isaac failed to see, not just literally, but figuratively, is that Esau had a disregard for God's law. He didn't follow God's law. He married, women outside of Israel. He didn't like marry. He married foreign women, and he had no respect for his birthright. So just because he was the firstborn, Esau is prime proof that the firstborn does not necessarily mean you're the best choice. And that was the problem. And by doing that and being that, he kind of opened up the possibility that something could be done for that deception, right? So Esau kind of proved that he was not what God intended going forward. And so that deception that Jacob had done would ultimately become, God's plan. Now, is Jacob flawed? Yes, he is. He's a very deceitful young man. We see that, and we know that through many instances of this story, before and after. But at the same time, he was faithful to God. He was flawed, but he was faithful. Okay? And eventually he would carry out God's promises that he made to Abraham and to Isaac. So that promise, that covenant that was given to his grandfather, would be honored through the flawed but faithful Jacob in this matter. So that's where you see, and if you ask the question why, that kind of gets you the answer. Do you really think that Esau would care anything about God's plan? No, he had no concern in that whatsoever. Again, he did not obey God's laws at all. He was careless with his birthright, and he married women that were not of of Israel, of the people. So why bother? He didn't marry within the family like he was supposed to. He married foreign women, exotic women, people of a different nation, a different religion that had nothing in common with them. And God did not want that. Okay? So now summarize, believers must avoid justifying wrong actions. True. Sometimes those wrong actions, even though they're wrong actions, they're still wrong. We can't sit there and say, well, for the greater good, this had to be done. They're wrong no matter what light you put them in. We have to acknowledge that. Believers must be diligent when examining truth claims. This is true. People come to church or in your family and they give you stories of any kind. If they tell you something out of the Bible and they say it's true, unless you can pick up the Bible and prove it yourself, is it? You have to ask yourself those questions. Believers can trust God to bring his purpose to pass in every situation. Amen. That he can. He can bring his purpose in every situation that you give him, whether you're involved or not. God's plans will unfold with or without our help. Okay? Thank you for watching. I appreciate you dialing in for another video. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below the video. If you want to, you can hit us up over at our web Facebook page. Leave a comment over there, like the page, follow the page, or just hit us up at webbaptist.com. Leave any prayer requests or concerns over there, and we'll be glad to get back in touch with you at our earliest convenience. As always, you're welcome to come down here to Webb Baptist and worship with us. We'd love to have you here on Sunday mornings and Wednesday afternoons. If you cannot make it here to Webb Baptist, get involved in a Bible-based church wherever you're at and get plugged in and see what God's got in store for you. Again, you're going to be a blessing to that family just as much as that family is going to be a blessing to you. I promise you this, okay? Until next time, take care. God bless.